I really just want to help people and help kids find their voice around pedophilia and help them say, no, don't touch me, you know, and help them know that, they don't need to internalize the shame. And there's just so much I want to do to help people with my series. And once I realized that I could, then here I am.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to another interview episode of Care More, Be Better. I'm your host, Corinna Bellizzi. Today we're going to deepen our discussion about trauma and the sorts of things that we all need to do as individuals to be resilient and to overcome. I am joined today by somebody local to me, Delicia Niami. She is an inspiring author whose life journey has transformed her into a symbol of resilience. From a young age, she faced unimaginable trauma, including a kidnapping that took her to a distant land. Her deeply vulnerable memoir, Kissing Asphalt, chronicles her triumphs and her hardships. She joins me today to talk about this work and her memoir series, Resilient AF, and you know what that AF stands for. Now, I will preclude today's episode with a bit of a trigger warning, much like when we dove into the challenges around sexual assault and sex trafficking when we interviewed the director and producer of California's Forgotten Children. We may tread into territories that make you a little uncomfortable. If you have young children with you, it may be time to pause and revisit this at a later time. With that, I'm welcoming her to the stage. Delicia, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's lovely to have you here. Now, as we get started, I know you have quite the audacious story to tell, but before we really dig into this, the substance of that, I'd love for you to kick us off with what inspires you and what do you hope will be the effect of telling your story in this raw and vulnerable way through your memoir and through coming on podcasts like this one.
Absolutely. I'm happy to. That's the entire reason why I wrote my story, was not to put my horrific life out there into the world, but more to inspire others. And actually, I had been told several times by psychics that if I wrote my story, it would be turned into a television movie or something like that. And I kept thinking to myself, why? What would be the point of that? There's no purpose of putting trauma out into the world. And it wasn't until I read the book when I was about 48 years old. I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And it brought me up so many aha moments about, one was that I had PTSD for 44 years and didn't even know it. And because I was 4 when I was in Baghdad, and everybody would ask me, oh, that must have been so traumatic.
Well, now you're giving away part of the story.
Oh, sorry.
No, I want to kind of dig into this together because, I mean, even the story of how you landed in Baghdad is one of note.
So this book actually is what motivated me to write my story and made me realize that I actually did have something to say. It wasn't all about trauma. I made it through. And not only did I make it through, I thrived and I'm happy. And I'm a well-adjusted individual who has friends that love me, that have stood by my side for many, many years. And I just feel so grateful every day that I get to walk this earth and to be able to take the trauma that I've had and turn it into something beautiful and positive to help others is like the greatest gift I've ever known in my life.
Well, I love that. And frankly, as I prepped for this interview, I went to look at your audiobook on Amazon and even just clicked that sample story to hear 5 minutes from it. You narrate it. And so as I was listening to Kissing Asphalt, I hear you tell the beginning of this very harrowing story in which you described that you thought you would be going on a trip to Disney World
Correct.
And that it turned out to be something entirely different, which, I mean, this lands us in Baghdad. But I'd love for you to tell that story and how it changed your perspective about the world.
Oh, wow. Okay, sure. I actually just wrote a blog post that I put out about what being American and gay means to me. And it had a lot to do with me being taken to Baghdad. And so it really has affected my views of the world on a really big, big scale. Nobody's actually asked me that question. So it's very interesting. But what happened was I was 4, my brother was 7, and my mother and father had been separated for about a year. She was dating a cop and was on a vacation in Big Bear in Southern California. And she had arranged it so that our father was going to pick us up for Easter break and spend 5 days with us. And we hadn't seen him for months and months and months. And, at 4, you don't really understand that. And so my aunt was watching us and she was in the backyard and we were playing on the front lawn. And he showed up and said, "Come on, kids, let's go." And we knew we were supposed to go with him. So my brother, being 3 years older than me, said, I'm going to go get our bags. And he said, no, don't worry. I already got all your stuff packed. So without thinking about telling our aunt or anything, we just hopped in the car and he told us we were going to Disneyland, actually. And we ended up at LAX. And I didn't know much, but my brother was like, excuse me, this isn't Disneyland. And then he said, "Oh, don't worry, son. I'm taking you to Disney World. I wanted to surprise you. So we have to go on a plane to go to Disney World." So we're both like, "Yay, we're going to Disney World. We've never been there before." And so we got on a plane and I don't know how many 20 hours later, I woke up in Baghdad. As soon as he got us, he had this all planned out. He had gotten us passports. He was in the midst of getting us Iraqi citizenship. And it was kind of harrowing, and the fact that my mom got us back was huge for me. And the end of that chapter actually ends with her taking us to Disneyland and the safety that I felt as soon as I walked through, and I still cry every time I walk through those arches at Disneyland that say, here you leave today and enter the world of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy. And every time, I felt like that little tonnage passageway was my passageway to safety. And I knew that I would never be ripped away from my mom ever again.
Wow. Well, that's so touching. Now, I know that having been kidnapped by your father, because it's within the family, it's almost like, well, I'm supposed to be with my dad, right? So
Correct.
Here you are, like a 4-year-old, and you're doing what you're told and what's expected of you. So I'm just hoping that you can help our audience understand what that was like for you, and perhaps at what stage you were when you were finally able to be back with your mother.
So he sent us home on my 5th birthday because the airlines would not allow us to fly any sooner since we were kids, even though my brother was 8 at the time. He had turned 8 while we were in Baghdad. On my 5th birthday, he sent us back. And so that was the soonest he could without him coming back with us. And the reason he sent us back, it was very interesting having to go through all of the records and data that I have from my mom. Kept everything, every receipt, every message, everything from anyone and I was able to go back through everything and see what she had done to try and get us back. It was pretty incredible.
Well, the moment that you're across state lines, it's difficult enough, but at least then you're within the United States.
Exactly.
Here you're in a completely different country, a day's travel away easily, multiple flights, and that must have been a very disruptive and challenging thing for her to experience, especially not knowing how you're doing on a daily basis. As a mother of 2 young children that are age 6 and 9 now, that story alone really shook me.
Yeah, it's a frightening thought and it happens often, this was 1975 when he took us and 1976 when we came back. So, imagine too, without the internet, without the access of that to be able to figure out what to do to get your kids back when they're in a country that women have 0 rights. Yeah, I don't know how she did it. Thank God my mom was tenacious and resourceful, and she was able to figure it out. And part of that was she had threatened suicide.
Hmm.
She had written there were correspondence letters back and forth between them. And one of them was, I don't know what you want from me, but I can't live without my kids. And if I don't have my children back, I'm going to commit suicide. So
I think about your work thus far. You really have shown yourself to be a survivor in so very many ways. I understand that you came back to the States not even confident anymore, and your ability to really speak English and then to have to re-engage and learn again in this new space and time. So I really wanted to see if you could talk a bit about how you think you have been able to retain this resilience and ultimately stay positive.
um people have asked me that before, and I don't really know. I feel like it's something that was innate in me, and something that just knew from the time I was a little kid that, like, I was constantly teased in school after we got back. And I always had this resilience in me. Like, I remember times where the days would just be horrific of people teasing me all day long. And it'd be raining and I would walk home by myself. And this was elementary school, third or fourth grade. And I would walk home by myself. And when I was by myself, I felt happy. I would dance and sing in the rain and pretend like I was Gene Kelly. And it was fun. I had fun. And I don't know where it came from after being bashed down so much all day. I just knew that I had to find that joy somehow, some way. I had to find my joy, and I had to just figure it out. And even if it was just something as silly as dancing and singing in the middle of the street, I had to do that. And I still do that to this day. And it's funny because people look at little kids doing that and think, oh, that's so cute. And people look at adults doing that and think, what a lunatic, but it's like, part of my thing is like, why aren't we allowed to have fun as adults? Why aren't we allowed to dance and sing in the street and play in the rain? Why is it cute for kids and not for adults? We're allowed to find our joy.
I think for adults, it looks like sports, right? Like that's the socially accepted play, so to speak, or surfing or, bounding up walls as a rock climber, mountain biking, things along these lines. But just dancing is something that I think we don't explore enough as adults. Yeah.
And playing.
Mm-hmm. I think there's something to that. Where I have children, it's like suddenly socially acceptable again to be a goofball.
Exactly. And now hopefully with my puppy, it'll be socially acceptable again and for me to be a goofball as well. But because I am ultimately a goofball at heart.
Now, I was actually curious, and this has to do with the process of bringing your books through to fruition, because you sent me the audiobook for Kissing Asphalt, which was kind of step one. And now you have step two, this Not My Circus, and then the next installment, which you'll be releasing later. What made you choose to separate this into 3 books? And what can people expect from them? Because I understand that you've taken a bit of a non-traditional approach to the writing of a memoir, for one. And then I have my own kind of thoughts about the first story you tell in Not My Circus.
Absolutely. So I wanted to do it all in one book until I started taking memoir classes, and I realized that memoir is a slice of life. It's not, and since I'm not a known person, I couldn't write an autobiography that was 800 pages. So instead, they encouraged me, and I felt like I couldn't inspire people enough unless I told my whole story, unless they were able to see from start to finish the life that I lived and how I overcame that. And so that was kind of my inspiration for splitting it up. And the reason I split it up the way that I did was I didn't mean to do something that was a faux pas in memoir, which is leaving it with a cliffhanger. But I did mean to do that on one sense because I had to continue the story. And there's something that happens in the first part of Not My Circus that actually plays into a later part in my story without giving it away too much. And it's a very poignant piece in my story, in my healing journey, in my aha moment, which actually didn't come until a few months ago at 53 years old. And I try not to really write forward thinking stuff in my books. I'm trying to keep it like in the space that I'm at that time so that when people come to the third book, that they're with me. You know what I mean? Like they're living this with me. And so that was my goal in this, but it was really important in the second book to have the continuation of the end of the first book because it plays out. So people will see it and they'll be like, "Oh, I see why she did that now." But
Well, and, as we started this podcast episode, I started the show with a trigger warning because some of the things that we can talk about today, including sexual assault, can really hit people, especially if there are remnants that remind them of their own lives in any capacity. And if we are to talk about the fact that your mother was killed by murder, that's a really trauma-inducing event and can bring people back to their trauma, open fresh wounds, and really, make for uncomfortability, even as that individual might, in the reading of it, be doing their own form of healing as well. So as you kick off this second book, Not My Circus, at least with the portion that you've shared with me thus far, which is, I think, still in the works, it essentially starts with the story of sexual trauma, of a rape.
correct. That's correct.
So, as it stands, I wonder what your reasoning is for starting off with such a traumatic story. If that was intentional and what the reader can expect after they get through that initial kind of rip the Band-Aid off deep, dark story.
Super intentional because that's where the first book ends. So the first book ends, and I'll just throw it out there right now since we're talking about it. The first book ends saying, "Mom, I was just raped." And then it sort of like goes into the wrap up of the book and what I think and all that stuff. And some people hated that. They were like, "Oh my God, this woman, she lived through such BS and this is how it ends." But that's not how it ends. And that's what I want people to know, that I do have a happy ending. It's just we're not there yet, And so this was a continuation of the end of that book where I say, "Mom, I was raped." And so it sort of like wraps it up for people. The first chapter of Not My Circus is called Unjustified. And it talks about how and why the police decided not to prosecute my perpetrators. And like I said, that leads into the reason I didn't end the first book with that chapter was because it leads into something very, very poignant and something very, very important in the second book, which people will wonder about, the Trustworthy Monster chapter number 2. Because in the first book, there's a Trustworthy Monster chapter number 1, and people were wondering, where's chapter number 2? Well, it's in the second.
Well, what you did do in architecting your books this way in particular is create the desire to continue reading a series. So I think in that way you did it right, like the way somebody would approach it in a fiction work, but it's nonfiction, so it strikes a different chord, so to speak.
Yeah, it didn't sit well with a lot of people. I just call myself raw and edgy, so what can I do?
So for those people that are waiting for this second book, where are we now? Because it's in pre-sale at the present moment on your website, delicianiami.com. And I will include direct links with show notes as I always do, so people can find the book easily. But if they're interested in hearing this and in continuing your story, when can they expect this book to be available?
So the book will be out August 1st. I am just finishing the very, very last edits now. on InDesign, and my distributor's waiting for it. We've already got everything else ready to go. And so that'll be out August 1st. And this weekend, I'm going in and recording the audiobook.
Wow.
And that takes a little bit longer. Last time it took Amazon about 8 weeks to approve it. So I'm hoping the sooner we can get it in, the sooner it'll be out for everybody, because I know a lot of people like the audiobook. And I am recording this one myself as well.
That's fantastic. Well, it will, I'm sure, be a much loved story. It's really unique to hear it in your own voice as well. Now, I wanted to talk about this perspective because you felt, I think, secure enough in your relationship with your mother to essentially go to her right away and say, Mom, I was raped. Now, at the time that this happened was late 80s, right? I think it was 1988, if I remember correct.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah. And that period, I think people have a hard time looking back and remembering what it was like back then. And also it varies so much by state, what happens in the case of sexual assault, when you report it, what happens with that reporting, what can be prosecuted versus what can't, what the statute of limitations are. I mean, all of these things change by state. Right. And it makes it incredibly difficult, I think, for people from the outside looking in to really understand what that could have been like for you at that moment. So I wanted to open the door for you to share that story, or at least as it pertains to how you felt about it, the emotions you were running through, and ultimately how you feel about it now today, looking back.
Wow. The feelings I had were defeat. I felt like I was somebody who was just a burden to the police as opposed to a victim. And the reason being was immediately when I told the police that I was intoxicated and passed out drunk, they said, good luck in the future. Basically, I hope you're more careful, you know? And I do think things have changed quite a bit, thankfully. Back then they didn't even have rape kits at the hospital, really, when you came in. You know, they didn't have these things to test to see, although the doctor did do the tests and saw that, yes, it was clear that you were violated. And, you know, it was haunting in a different way to me. And I've never actually said this on any podcast or put it in any book or anything like that. But I'm not a sexually active person because of my past. And I didn't have sex since that date that I was raped. And that was 17. When I was 23, I was diagnosed with HPV. And I had been going to the doctor every year. And I said, how is this possible? Like, I don't have sex. I haven't had sex since I was 17. And that was not something that I wanted to do. And the doctor said, unfortunately, it can stay dormant in your system for a really long time. Lucky for me, they froze it all off. They caught it in time. And, you know, I'm confident it's not going to cause any more issues in my life because God wouldn't do that to me. So there, yeah. But that's something I had never said. So, I mean, it affected me lifelong, you know, and it wasn't something I asked for. And I just felt like the police weren't on our side. Like, rape was something that was looked at kind of like a joke in a way. And honestly, that's one thing that scares the bejeezers out of me about this coming political thing is, you know, Trump is saying if he wins, he's going to give police complete immunity. And I'm like, wow, I have seen, and in this book, you'll see that's dangerous. That's really dangerous, you know, and they take that power and they abuse it. And that's the problem, you know, and I talk about Rodney King in this book and what happened at Rodney King. I talk about the AIDS epidemic and how that came about and how we were living in the heat of the AIDS epidemic and all my friends that were gay, you know, surrounded by this. And it's just like, there's so much that has come about throughout history that people don't see from back then, you know, and I think it's really important. And that's why I try to put history as a piece of my memoir. And you'll see in this memoir where I talk about, for example, there was a time in California where we tried to get equal rights for everyone as far as working rights goes. And there was a bill called AB 101, and the governor of California vetoed it. And this was before we had internet, before we had anything. And as I'm driving, I get stuck at a light the day after he vetoes it. And I'm like annoyed because I want to get home and get out of traffic. And all of a sudden I hear chanting starting and I'm like, what is going on? This is ridiculous. Like, this is not a good time in the world, you know? And I rolled down my window, and I worked at The Advocate at the time, the National Gay and Lesbian News magazine. So I was really steeped in LGBTQ politics. And I rolled down my window, and the chanting got louder. And then all of a sudden, thousands and thousands and thousands of protesters lined the streets holding these signs like, we work just as hard as our straight neighbors, and like all these, like, you know, and I just sat in my car and cried. I just like how did all these people know to come together without the internet? How did all these people know to band together on the street and come together for fighting for their rights in the same time at the same place, and thousands of them on the street? Like, it was just, and I was in my early 20s, and I had just started to learn about all the discrimination and all, because you're kind of shielded as a child from that stuff, you know? I mean, except for the teasing in school, but you don't really know that it happens outside of school until you get outside of school.
That's right. Well, and as you're hearkening too, I mean, I think that the only way to really get people in the streets is not through things like social media, but, you know, hey, phone trees and letters and true campaigns. And, you know, I've just seen so many very interesting protests erupt over the past 10 years, things that weren't even possible in the days before we had a more immediate technology, like flash mobs, for example.
Right.
Which
Right.
I think are a really creative way to come together, and sometimes even through the power of dance to disrupt something, or being able to utilize that moment to barricade a road on a day when you're giving no warning, essentially, because that's the only way you can truly disrupt something. So I think that there's great power in organizing, and that there's great power in showing that through physical protest. But in this day and age, it almost feels like we're being discouraged from utilizing the rights that we have in our hands already. So I wanted to kind of bridge this conversation from your experience into something that I think kind of is at the root of that, which is that when you've experienced so much trauma over the years, and you could look at things like the COVID pandemic, that is trauma. You could look at things like the Roe v. Wade being taken away from you. This is political trauma. It's the government telling you you don't have authority over your own body anymore, especially if you're somebody who has experienced sexual trauma or rape. You know, you have a deeper understanding of what that could mean for somebody because you've lived through something like that. So now we get into a space where it's almost like we're all the black sheep that were therefore marked at an earlier age. And so we got picked on and picked on and picked on and picked on through school or whatever. But now it's happening as an erosion of rights. And so people across the country, from coast to coast, yourself, myself included, are starting to feel, I think, more disempowered, which is exactly what the political system essentially on that far right side, they really want us to feel disempowered. Like, we can't change anything. Like, you just have to accept it. You know, what was the quote from the Heritage Foundation?
Yeah. As long as we're peaceful,
left allows it.
Yeah. I'm like,
we're in the second American Revolution, which will be bloodless as long as the left allows it to be. I think that's the direct quote, as close as possible as I can remember it.
What I say is, I'm left. I'm not a Democrat. I'm a no party because I don't really fit into the Democratic Republic. I believe in a lot of different things, right? But I am calm and peaceful until you give me a reason not to be. And I think a lot of the people on the left feel that way as well. So don't threaten me with your bloodshed. You know, like, I've got a lot of pent up rage inside of me from everything that's happened. So, you know, it's kind of like I'm scared. And I've thought, like, I want to move from this country if that happens, because I don't want to live in a country where there's that many bigoted people, you know? But at the same time, I feel like, no, I need to fight for this country. You know, just like at the same time, while we're on the subject, can I just say I'm mind boggled at the Democratic Party. If you look at these Trump supporters who are like, I would vote for him if he killed somebody in front of me. And Joe Biden goes up and messes up on a few words, and we're like, dump him like a piece of trash. Like, what kind of party does that? No.
Well, in all fairness, I think it's more than a couple of words, but That being said, I am voting blue no matter who when it comes to the presidential election.
Just for our
And
own freedoms, if for
it's
nothing else,
it's become an issue of freedom. That's why so many Republicans are actually jumping ship from the party, at least as it relates to the presidential seat. Like they're choosing to vote blue for that reason.
Bravo.
And it's about time. I think what has happened is that the Republican Party has essentially become corrupted, and it is no longer necessarily the party of conservatism. We are essentially living in a bizarro world where it is really all about the elite class and developing profits for the few while riding on the backs of everybody else.
Yep.
And the interesting thing about this is that they've pulled us into a situation where the very people who will stand to lose the most from this type of a system are the ones that are jumping into the streets to vote for Donald Trump, which is just terrifying. It goes to show you how brainwashing happens. And this ultimately is part of what has caused many people to refer to it as a cult. So I don't think it's any surprise.
MAGA should be its own party personally, because I know a lot of Republicans and they're saying, I mean, they are not MAGA people. They're not extremists. They're not white supremacists. They appreciate the fact that we have lower taxes. All of the things that Republicans would run on before that were actual political things to run on, not like I'm a lunatic and this is what I think and Hannibal Lecter's a great person. And
yeah, well, the fact that most people are going to end up paying more taxes than they were before. And we're already seeing that from the tax cuts and the tax code that Donald Trump and his time in office that landed us in. So.
And for me, I say, like, hearkening back to what we were talking about before, is my time in Baghdad made me very, very, very grateful to be an American. My patriotism runs really deep. Like, I will never, never not put my hand on my heart if I'm saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Never, and this country means so much to me. And I grew up in the 70s and I was like raised to know that America was a melting pot and that it was, land of the free and that anybody could make something of themselves if you could make it to America, and that's what I grew up believing. And this is just totally opposite. And it's not freedom. And I say to people, if I had to pay $100 a gallon for gasoline and in exchange for my freedom, I would do it. Not just because I'm a woman, also because I'm a woman of color, also because I'm gay. And I appreciate being free. I like my life. It doesn't matter. And it shouldn't matter to anybody else. Whether I'm dating somebody, which I'm not, I'm not having sex in front of people. I'm not making out in front of people. I'm alone, and I just want to be free and be me and feel like I can be without someone bashing me just because of who I am. And I do talk about that a lot in the book too. And how, the LGBT people have fought so hard for their rights. And I feel like right now things are just not even just for us, for everybody is just being ripped away.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard time for a lot of people. And frankly, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we will see the tide turn to something that does get back to protecting our rights again. I know that there are people in Congress, and in particular in the Senate, who are putting forward some initiatives to disempower a bit the Supreme Court as it presently stands from their authoritarian present state. So we'll see what happens.
She rocks. Well, I like her.
She's in the House. Yeah. And she is quite something. So let's see what happens with Clarence Thomas and whether or not his feet are actually held to task.
I feel like I'm in like a Twilight Zone episode or something,
Okay. So I have something I wanted to bring up just for the fun of it. Have you ever seen the film Idiocracy?
No.
Okay. Well, Terry Crews plays in that film the president of the United States. And he basically he's like this bodybuilder guy with a bandana and long hair, right? And he's really buff and he wears essentially an American flag kind of like bodysuit, like shorts, but like spandex, raw, And he's running for president. He gets elected president. And they have this initiative where, there's this electrolyte drink called Brondo, right? Which has like caffeine and electrolytes and sugars. And through lobbying, the company Brondo gets this approved as the thing that they're going to water their crops with.
Oh my.
So of course, throw salts and all sugar and
about
caffeine on all these plants, right? And so like all the plants go away. It's just this bizarro universe, but it's really funny. And it's too close to truth now for how our political system is in parody, right? But Terry Crews recently has started taking to social media as President Camacho, which is his character. And the first time I saw it, I thought, oh, this is a skit. How cute, how funny. Terry's coming onto social to have some fun, right? Kind of like he did when he had the muscle flexing drum set thing going. I don't know if you remember that. But I just thought, okay, he's having some fun. But now he's doing like press interviews.
Oh, that's so cool.
As if it's serious. And I'm just so in love with it. It just, if we can poke a little bit of fun at ourselves at the same time that we address the political system and the way that we've presently architected how things are working, then I think there's hope. And that's not to say that, I want to be in the bizarro land that we're stuck in today, but it is to say that there's a way to engage young people, even if it is with a bit of humor, to get them to the ballot.
Same difference now.
Slightly, it feels a little bit like that. Like performative, right? Like, oh,
yeah, totally.
But keep voter rights at central focus. Make sure that everyone's registered to vote and have your voice heard. And ensuring that your voice is heard can come in a number of ways. It can come through protest. It can come through speaking up at City Hall. It can come through attending the trial of somebody who really deserves to see that an audience bears witness and disproves of their behavior or of something that happens, to really just exercise your rights, to use them. Because my present feeling is if we don't use our rights, we risk losing them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I have faith as well and hope that there are way more people. I have faith that he's going to lose by a landslide. Because I have faith that there's enough people in this country that appreciate our freedoms and that want to embrace that and embrace our democracy as a country that we have known since it has been in inception and not go backwards to the 1700s.
And to hold the rule of law to be applicable to every person so that no person is above the law. I mean, I feel like that needs to be the case. I understand the president have certain protections for acts like when Barack Obama sent SEAL Team 6 to assassinate.
But he didn't need that because there was nothing he did wrong. He
didn't do anything that would have been really called to question that we know about. And I will say that we know about because, frankly, there is so much that is considered confidential and top secret that we'll never really learn.
And when you see that the most is when you go to other countries and you watch the news on other countries, you realize that the American news, I don't care what, in NBC, Fox, well, they're whatever, CNN, any of the news.
Entertainment news. They're entertainment news.
They want us to see what they want us to see, and that's all they want us to see.
No,
and it's
right.
like frightening, and you don't.
That's the reason I listen to podcasts.
Right? and dig deep, right? That's the reason why you have to dig deep and you have to share the things. Like I shared something on my Facebook today, which was political that I don't normally do. But one of the guys I watch on YouTube, Adam Mockler, who's this really smart 21-year-old kid, he did all these talking points basically showing how Trump does know about, Project 2025, how the people that wrote it worked for him. How, how his current press secretary has already done a video for them, how like all this stuff to combat that. So I thought it was, I know I have some Trump supporters on my Facebook. So I thought it was important to put it out there so that they are informed. And I'm not saying like, don't be a supporter, but I'm just saying be informed.
Yeah,
And
well,
if
I mean, if
that's
you
how you really
compare
want to vote, like, I don't know if I want you in my life because you don't support me as a human being, as who I am at my core, you know?
Yeah, I understand, but I also think that even that type of thinking is polarizing.
It's bad.
I
Yeah, it's
I
bad.
just think that, if we can get to a space where even the people who do support him can essentially compare Agenda 47 and Project 2025, and if you look at the two side by side, which unfortunately most won't because it takes time, effort, and energy, but if you look at the two side by side, you'll see pretty quick that the Agenda 47 is essentially like the Cliff Notes version. I call it like the 10 Commandments version of
Right.
Project 2025. So if the meat and potatoes end goal is the same, they're the same.
Exactly.
And so we
Exactly.
also know that Donald Trump is mentioned I think it's over 200 times in the Project 2025 manifesto.
Absolutely. And that he already did comply to 64% of
Mhm.
policy changes in his first term that they
Right,
wanted
exactly.
within the first year that he was in there, not in
When
his
when
first
I
term.
first learned about Project 2025 was shortly after Trump lost the election last time. I think that's when they really got active because they essentially said, our goal is to ensure that whomever ends up in the office in 2025 will have the playbook so we can get back everything we lose during this 4 years under Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Like that was their whole message. So if you know that that's the case, that they want to walk back as much as possible, as quickly as possible and put these agendas into effect, that you can understand then from like the top line outsider perspective, they're looking to make a lot of the changes that we were able to enact temporarily under Donald Trump into permanent solutions. And part of how they did that was through stacking the Supreme Court. And
Exactly.
so we need to get to some sort of a solution in that arena. I'm sure we will. I don't think that all the chips have fallen yet.
I hope so. Because what they did is so scary. And I'm somebody who studied law,
Mhm.
who wanted to become an attorney, who wanted to become a judge. And that's what Not My Circus, the end of the book, talks about, watching my mother's murder trial and realizing, wow, I've worked my whole life for something that I don't want to do. What am I going to do now? You know? And it's like 32 years old figuring out, oh, everything I did was for nothing, but I'm still very interested in politics and in the legal system. And what they did was scary. Like
Yeah.
I'm beside myself and hope and pray that can get overturned because, like you said, every single solitary person in this country should be upheld to the law of the
Yeah,
land, you know?
exactly. So I think we're on the same page there. And Delicia, I very much look forward to the release of your second book in this series, Not My Circus, which comes out, you said, on August 1st. This episode should be released right around that time, probably a week later.
Yay.
So I think it'll hit right in the timeline that you'll want to see it out in there. And hopefully we can see some success for you in that arena. And then I understand after that book, you have the third in the series coming out, which you're calling The Queen of Silver Linings.
Yes, ma'am.
So in my mind, this is la pièce de résistance. It's the solutions and finale of this series that is your memoir. Yeah. So do you want to close with a little information on what people can expect from the entire series?
Sure. Yeah. So the second book will take you through my mother's murder trial, like I mentioned. And it also takes you on a bunch of fun stuff, like when I lived in Switzerland and being able to, when I lived in Switzerland was very, very poignant because I was able to have a lot of aha moments around men in particular and the abuse that I had suffered from men for so long. And I encountered so many men that were kind and didn't expect anything from me other than a conversation or a friendship or a nice meal. And that wasn't something I was used to. And that was not something I ever encountered before. So that part of my travels to Europe is a very poignant part of the book and starts making me question the walls that I built and what I'm losing because of these walls that I built up around me and how I might be missing out on certain things in life because of the walls that I was kind of forced to build up around me. So that's And it talks, like I talked about a little bit, the politics and all that stuff. And then the third book goes into my healing journey and the things that I've done to try and heal, which have been any on the spectrum from here to there, from therapy, regular talk therapy, art therapy, hypnotherapy, EMDR, CBR, DBR, all these different kinds of therapies that I've done. And then I branched out. Therapy wasn't just working. I needed more than therapy. So I started with plant medicine. I started with trips to Sedona doing breath work sessions, which was probably the most powerful thing, where I was able to go back and hold hands with my little 4-year-old girl in Baghdad and take a match and burn down that house that we lived in together and walk away from that terrible time in my life and shed some of that copious weight that I was holding onto from that. And you'll read about times like I did a mushroom trip where the guy that I did it with was supposed to be focused on figuring out the sexual abuse, how it started, how I met my abuser, my first abuser, Isaac. And instead, it took a completely different turn. My mother was violently murdered. She wasn't just murdered. She was violently murdered in her home. She was beaten to death on her living room floor by a stranger. And it was noted by the district attorney and the judge that it was Placer County's most violent crime ever. And so I didn't realize until I did this this mushroom thing that I held deep within my soul somewhere the question of how much she suffered. I didn't even realize. I held it so deep down that I wouldn't even let that question surface into my mind because it would have hurt me so much to think about it. And during this mushroom trip, my mom came to me and she said, "Come on, let's go." And I went with her, like, without question. And we were all of a sudden in her living room. And I saw my picture on the mantelpiece and I said, "No, and I started like slapping my face literally to like come out of the trip because I didn't want to go back there. I didn't want to see what happened. But she literally like talked me into it, said, I'm not going to show you anything that will hurt you. And I literally lived the murder through her eyes of what happened. She took me through step by step. And the reason she did this, and I write all about it in the book, so I don't want to go too much into it, but the reason she did it was to show me she didn't suffer. And that the minute that he hit her, that first blow knocked her unconscious and she was gone. So that shed a lot of weight for me as well, emotional baggage, emotional weight that I didn't even know existed. And so a lot of this, I have a shaman who wants to take me to Peru and take me through the forest and the jungles. And I'm like, no way, Jose, I don't want to do that. Like ayahuasca scares me. Like some of this stuff really scares me, but it's strange because I write about in this book how I did toad venom. It's called sapo or bufo, and it's supposed to be one of the most hallucinogenic drugs out there. But the reason why I did it is I write about in this second book how my brother and my mother didn't talk for about 1.5 years before her demise. And my brother went in and did this toad venom thing. And he called me right after and said, "Wow, you should do this," because I have Crohn's disease. And he said, "I think this is going to heal you. I think you're going to get better." Like, I don't know. Like I went and waved bye to mom up in heaven. And I'm like, okay, I'll try it. So I did. I didn't experience anything like he experienced. And afterwards I read about sapo, bufo, toad venom as a plant medicine. And you could either go really dark or you could go really light like he did. And it really depends on your past. And since I had such a traumatic past, when I got out of it, my voice was gone. And I was like, yeah, I can't talk. And they both started laughing. And I'm like, it's so funny, And they said, my brother was like, "I heard sounds come out of you that I never heard before." He said, "I thought I was going to have to call the police because it sounded like a triple homicide in here. He said, you were screaming so much. And that trip lasted for 4 days. And I journaled the whole time. And I think what happened was all of my molesters had died at that point. And I think I just went to the underworld, wherever they were, and they were all there at one place. And I just unleashed my rage on what they had done to me, and it was like, just stuff like that is still kind of heavy, the third book and the stuff that I've done to heal. But the end is I'm happy and well-adjusted. I'm back on land that I lived on 23 years ago that had burned in the CZU fire. I'm rebuilding my dream home here, and I'm living in the place that I've always wanted to live, which is Santa Cruz. And I couldn't be happier.
Well, that's a good ending to a terrible historical story. So I wish for you all the warmth, the light, the love, and the happiness.
Thank you.
And I really hope that you telling this story both heals you on that deep and profound level, but also offers insights and healing to those around you. I know this is not easy, and I appreciate the tremendous effort that you've undertaken to bring it out into the world. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. I really just want to help people and help kids find their voice around pedophilia and help them say, no, don't touch me, and help them know that, they don't need to internalize the shame. And there's just so much I want to do to help people with my series. And once I realized that I could, then here I am,
Well, thank you again for joining me today. You and I, I'm sure, could talk much more deeply and continue this conversation as well. But our time today has come to a close. So I just want to offer you a moment to offer any closing thoughts that you might have, perhaps a wish or a prayer.
I just hope that this country all bands together right now and appreciates everybody's freedom and everybody's individuality and knows that it's okay and that we inspire the rest of the world. And if we are run on hate, the rest of the world will run on hate. If we're run on love, the rest of the world will run on love.
Fantastic. Again, Delicia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
To find out more about Delicia Niami, you can visit her website, delicianiami.com. And if you have trouble finding that or trouble spelling it, you can always visit our show notes on whatever platform you're picking this up on. As always, we have our expanded blog page at caremorebebetter.com. This includes the video version of this podcast episode, complete transcripts, and connections to other podcast episodes we mentioned today, like that episode with a filmmaker for California's Forgotten Children. As a reminder, we are getting ready to launch our new Cause Before Commerce site this summer, and eventually, this website for Care More Be Better will redirect to that one. All of our assets will live there. And ultimately, what we're seeking to do with this new development with CircleB.co is to provide you with resources to live a little greener and a little more thoughtfully each day. We will offer products that can engage you with that, give how-to resources to how you can live and engage in a more green, socially responsible way, and which actually help you to minimize your waste. Now, with that, I want to say to all of you, thank you so much for listening today. To all of you, and to those who have experienced trauma like that has been expressed by Delicia today, I hope that you will also connect with the resources that we provide. At the finish of the blog page, there will be several different resources that you can connect with. These are replicated from California's Forgotten Children and that episode, but I just want to make sure, again, that you have access to resources to support your journey if you're confronting some of these challenges. It's my belief that by banding together, we can create a better world. So thank you again for joining me today. And my hope for everyone is that with this content and with this share, that you'll all be able to step forward with a little bit more confidence into your today and into your tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.